Okay, before we get too far into this, I just need to say the cheap looking button down shirt and tie office attire, I think Loki looked cute in that. Loki, episode 2. I just did 2 with 2 hands. It's not episode 4, it's episode 2. The Variant. So we move forward, and it has gone where I did a little bit of predicting that it would go, at least in certain elements. I will hold off on that for a little bit, but I'm going to spend a pretty decent amount of time talking about the thing towards the end. So before I get in there, no, I'm still enjoying this. While there are some really neat ideas and some cool presentations of stuff, I'm finding the overall progression of it fairly predictable in terms of plot beats so far, but I do have hope that it's going to start to throw a few more curveballs, and again, I'll explain why once I get a little bit more into spoilers. But this is pretty much what you would have expected the second episode to be after that first episode set everything up and set up the premise of Loki helping hunt down a variant. So it is Loki and Mobius going to a couple of different points in time, trying to, well, first of all, just trying to figure out how to even track down the variant, and then trying to actually do that, and just moving things along that path. Again, with a few specific beats along the way that I really do like, but it is basically what I expected it to be. There wasn't really too much in the way of outright surprise, though, like I said, a couple of clever things, which I would consider minor spoilers. So I guess this is your minor spoiler warning, where I talk about things sort of in the main body of it. I'll give you the major spoiler warning before I get to the stuff that happens at the end. So there's a number of things I really like about this. I'm going to freely say that, this variant that they're hunting is another Loki, because that was said at the end of the previous episode. So if you saw the previous episode, that's not even a spoiler at this point. I do like that during sort of the briefing, it gets established that there have been a lot of variant Lokis. There's a couple of things I like about that. First is, it establishes something that actually makes a ton of sense for a character like Loki, which is that he has stepped off his intended path a lot. And for the God of Mischief, yeah, that absolutely tracks. And it sort of makes things more interesting for this Loki, because if you stop and think about it for a minute, that means that, he was on his intended path to a point. Did all these other deviants that they're talking about, did they deviate at earlier points than he did? At later points than he did? How exactly that works is just interesting to start to think about. The other thing that it does, in addition to establishing the fact that Loki, just as a character, does this a lot, which tracks, beautiful, love it. And the other thing that it establishes, there are differences with these variants. Sometimes, as they point out, sometimes subtle, sometimes very significant differences. Now, part of that is setting up stuff that goes on later on in this very episode. But also just in general, it's fun to see the little differences. Like there's this one Loki that we could get a quick view of, and he's really kind of hulked out and muscular. I was like, wait a minute. So it was fun for a visual gag for that as well. I love how Loki figures out, well, I love both the method by which Loki figures out how this variant version of himself is hiding, and then I love the explanation of how the hiding is done. So I like that Loki basically stumbles across the answer while trying to be on his own agenda. So, he's going about trying to gain access to information that he is not supposed to have, trying to get in touch with the timekeepers, which is not going to happen, and nobody wants him to be able to do that. So he's going about and trying to manipulate people, and they've pretty much all got his number because they all know how manipulative he is for now very obvious reasons. Besides the fact that they've got a whole file on him, they've been dealing with versions of him for a long time. They're gonna know the kind of stuff he tries to pull. That said, it does actually go pretty well for a hot minute in a few places where Loki starts to deliver something like, okay, he's making a point. And I think I caught on a little bit earlier than Mobius did, where you're like, okay, you're just trying to play this situation and get what you want. And they realize it too, which is good, because that means the other characters aren't dumb. One of the worst ways to make one character look smart is to just make everybody else stupid. That's the lazy way to do it. So I appreciate that they didn't go that road. And instead they're having Loki have his trickery not work as well, which is kind of the issue he had when trying to deal with Thor. Thor knows all his tricks. So him trying to keep on top of Thor through the usual means of deception doesn't work great because Thor's used to it. I mean, Thor would try and give him the benefit of the doubt now and then, which is probably something he shouldn't have been doing. But like, it limited Loki's bag of tricks, and he's kind of dealing with that same situation here with people who knows what he's about. So I like that in the process of trying to subvert what he's supposed to be doing, trying to find out additional information of how this timeline was developed, how it started, how it's supposed to end, what the sacred timeline actually is and where it's going. And he's shut down at every point. And he said, well, what information can I have access to? And he's just given his own file. And that's it. Now, first of all, despite the fact that the emotional high point of the last episode was Loki seeing key events in his own timeline that are now not his own life, they were what was supposed to happen to him, they managed to milk more of that again because it didn't occur to me that he didn't see that Ragnarok fell. He saw that he stood with Thor. He thought that he saw that he was kind of welcomed back into that fold. He saw that he died. He didn't see Ragnarok happen. He didn't see Asgard fall. And to have that hit him here, it was another way to just sort of ping that without having to sink as much time into it as was done last episode. It's a bit more of a callback, an emotional callback. And I like that. So I like the path that Loki as a character goes on to get to where he gets the information that allows him to figure out how this Loki variant is hiding. And I really like how the Loki variant's actually doing it. Because that's the kind of thing that's a little twist on time travel that I really, really like. Because I don't remember if I said this last time, but I prefer my time travel rules to be a little looser. And have a little bit more wiggle room, because the instant you are locked into either everything has to happen a certain way, no matter what you do, it will always happen that way timeline, or into any change whatsoever has massive ripple effects and therefore absolutely nothing can be changed sort of situation. There's only so many stories you can tell in those situations. It's fairly limiting. They can be very well done, but they don't appeal to me as much because there's not much freedom. That's why I tend to prefer something like Doctor Who, which has very loose and oftentimes ill-defined rules and does very well with them, or something like Legends of Tomorrow, where they establish, like, look, this thing happened and things are going wrong, but there is basically a window of time before the new timeline is locked in. So if we can go there and more or less put it back the way it was, it'll self-repair. It's this sort of loosey-goosey way of dealing with it, and I prefer that. So I like this idea here that ultimately what the sacred timeline cares about is not each individual thing that happens. It cares about outcomes. It cares about actions that cause a deviation from major outcomes. So if you go somewhere like Pompeii on Volcano Day, and, try not to run into the Doctor and Donna, then that means that anything you can do there is basically consequence-free, because it's all going to get wiped out by the volcano anyway. So it's not a matter of every single change, every single little ripple causes a butterfly effect. It's like, no, it only matters if it alters major things later on. And there are some things, in some circumstances, it actually does not matter what you do. And anything you do in that instance won't matter. But it also opens up the possibility that certain things you do that maybe aren't exactly what you were supposed to be doing might still be okay as long as they don't alter later events, which gives a little wiggle room on the notion of free will, which is also a conversation I really like that Loki has with Mobius, talking about free will, and Mobius kind of being like, well, no, like there kind of is, and it's not clear. And I kind of like that it's not clear right now whether Mobius's faith in the timekeepers and his kind of not being able to firmly explain how he still kind of believes there is at least a little bit of free will while also believing in the sacred timeline. I like that it's not clear right now whether he's that way because somewhere deep down he knows there is no such thing as free will, but he really doesn't want to think about that. He doesn't want to think about how the idea of free will doesn't gel with everything else, or if he actually does just understand things well enough that he understands that there is a little bit of wiggle room and free will. He just doesn't know how to explain it succinctly to Loki, which kind of will put him in the same category as when the Doctor doesn't really explain how things work to companions because, well, it's way too complicated. Just trust me, I know. And I like that we can't tell that yet. Now, if I'm going to make a certain amount of predictions, first of all, I'm reiterating what I said, which is that the timekeepers either never existed or don't exist now, because we keep building this idea that people don't see them. Mobius has never met them. That to me says that they are either a fiction and never existed at any point, or if they did, they are long since dead. And this whole thing is being done because they said it's what was supposed to happen, but they're not around to check with anymore. So maybe things changed since they died, but nobody is prepared to challenge that idea, assuming they even know. That's my guess. That's my prediction, is that they are just dead or never existed. I like that we get the judge back. They name dropped her, and I cannot remember it. She is a character from the comics, so that's kind of nice. And I like that they've set us at least somebody who is above Mobius that he can push back against and sort of make his case in favor of Loki too, because he kind of does need somebody like that. And if we're not going to have the timekeepers themselves, Judge is a good call for that. And I kind of like the dynamic the two of them have. I find it interesting and entertaining to watch. So I like that she showed up, and I'd be happy to see more of her. I kind of expect we will, especially considering we saw her like grab something off the mantle. I'm like, ooh, what's going on there? All right, let's get to the stuff that happens at the end. All right, so that's your major spoiler warning. Lady Loki called it. That said, I would not be surprised if we end up getting more variants aside from just her brought into this. That actually would make quite a bit of sense, especially considering we've already seeded the idea that it's not just two variants of Loki. I'd seen some people predict already that Richard E. Grant, who has an undisclosed role in this, is going to be some version of Loki, like old Loki, for lack of a better term, which would make sense and could be slotted into this. Now, first thing I want to say, Sophia DiMartino is an actress who I don't know, and I like that I don't know her. I like that they got somebody who, I checked her IMDb. She's been acting for a while, so obviously she's not like a newbie, but she hasn't been in really mainstream stuff. I actually think I only recognize two things she's been in, and none of it's stuff that I've ever seen before. So I like that we're getting a fresh face into this world, because it would have been very easy to stunt cast. And I even saw some people who agreed with me that Lady Loki was going to show up make that prediction. I saw some people say things like Anne Hathaway, and I'm like, I like this idea much better. I like this idea much, much more that it's an actress that most audiences aren't going to be familiar with, which makes the whole thing less predictable. Because if you get a bigger name, it feels like it feels like a gimmick, for one thing. And then the other thing is that it can often feel restrictive, because if you get a really big name, well, my immediate thought is, okay, this character's definitely not going to live to see the end of the series, because they would have to pay to keep bringing this person back, unless she's going to show up in the movies, because maybe they'd shell out that kind of money for her. What with someone like this actress, I don't know. They could do anything. They could do absolutely anything with her. And my brain isn't doing any of that kind of calculations that it would have been doing with someone who I recognized. We don't get a ton of time with her, so I really don't get to see her do much aside from play off of Tom Hiddleston's Loki, the Loki that we know. And I do enjoy that dynamic. I like her smugness. I like that she seems to have one up on this Loki and knows that. And how much that fact irks the Loki that we know. I find it interesting that they put the emphasis on sort of the hypnotism, enchantment kind of thing. It seems to be a little bit of a variant on what Loki was using the cosmic cube to do in Avengers, sort of take over people, but like a little bit different from that, because whereas Loki could basically, as long as he had control of the cube, take over people fairly completely, and quite a few of them, it seems like the way this works is this Loki can sort of almost directly puppet somebody, like even speak through them, but only one at a time. And it's something that has to be passed on from person to person. So that's an interesting twist on that sort of possession and command thing that we've seen Loki do in the past, but this is a little bit different. And I do like that our Loki does recognize it. So it's something that he is aware of and is familiar with. Oh, quick side note. I love that he got all pedantic about what it was that his magic is and that it wasn't illusion. It was, I forget exactly what he said, but he's like, no, it's this. It's different. Like, I love that they paused to have that conversation. I had a lot of fun with that. So her being here. All right, let's talk about that. So this is relieving on at least one level, because it means that the whole sex fluid thing that was in Loki's dossier wasn't lip service. It wasn't just a meaningless bone being thrown to people who care about the fact that Loki in the comics and in Norse mythology is one of the few solid pieces of representation for gender or sexual fluidity in fiction. So I'm glad that it wasn't just a token nod to it and they weren't actually going to do something with it. They have now done it. Now, this still puts things in a slightly odd place because we don't know exactly how these variants are created. Because like I said, we don't know at what point she split off. So we don't know if at some point she was like our Loki and chose to change gender or sex. We don't know if this is a Loki who broke off far, far earlier than this Loki did. And this was something that she chose to do that this Loki simply isn't on a path to make a decision to do. They might never explore it and just leave the idea of, look, it's a variant. It's going to be different. We're not going to explain why, which I'd be a little bit disappointed with, but at least wouldn't run the risk of like doing something that comes across as thoughtless and stupid. So there is the inherent sort of issue that, if we take Loki now as a gender fluid or technically in this sex fluid, which isn't quite so much a thing in reality, but I'm going to say gender fluid. Let me have it. As a gender fluid character, there is the inherent issue of, well, Loki's a deceiver. Both versions of Loki's are deceivers and manipulators and dangerous, but like that's baked into the character. That's, from the days of ancient mythology. So I'm not going to be as hung up about that as I would be with a character being created from scratch, a brand new character who was gender fluid and also a deceiver and a trickster and evil. So far, cool. I expected it to happen. So far, I'm good with how it has happened. I will be really curious to see how much more they choose to or to not explain going forward. Here's the other thing. I said like I felt like I knew where this was all going up to this point, and I really did. This was pretty much exactly what I expected. What I wasn't expecting is for Lady Loki, that's just what I'm going to call her right now, to do that much damage this early on. Because what she does to basically just send a whole bunch of resets all across the timeline to just cause absolute chaos and create who knows how many dozens, hundreds, maybe even of variant timelines that now suddenly the TVA is going to scramble to try and fix and might not be able to before it's too late. That's the kind of plan and the kind of power move I would expect to happen much later in the show. Like, it's only a 6-episode season, so like maybe episode 4 or 5 for that to happen. That should have been the thing that like we knew she was trying to do, but we must stop her. And oh no, she did it. Now we have to deal with that. She's pulled that off episode 2. So even though I feel like I've plotted this out pretty cleanly up to this point, it's now hit a point where I don't know what they're going to do exactly. So they now have this Loki, he followed her, like, is he going to join her? We're probably going to find out her motivations, which will probably tie into the Timekeeper stuff. But so there's going to be that. And we don't know really how much damage he has done. At this point, I don't feel like I can make, other than the Timekeeper stuff that I said, a ton of predictions about what's going to happen next. And that excites me. I have enjoyed the show up to this point, but it has been pretty much what I expected based off trailers. And this episode was pretty much what I expected based off the previous episode. But now, I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm thrilled to find out what it is. Loki, episode 2, The Variant. What'd you think? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon. Almost pointing to the wrong side of the screen. I have a Patreon. That is how I pay my bills. Rewards for every tier of support. I also have YouTube memberships. And if you are not able to do either of those things, don't worry about it. Like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. But even if you can't do that, it's okay. Because at the end of the day, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council